His relatives locked him out of the family business until the reading of the will, when he inherited the entire empire. The opulent conference room of Thorne Industries shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of expensive perfume, a carefully curated atmosphere designed to impress and intimidate. Maxwell Thorne and Genevieve Dubois, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of self-importance that had been honed over a lifetime of privilege, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table. Their expressions were a studied blend of expectation and a barely concealed triumph, a quiet smirk playing on Max's lips, while Genevieve's eyes held a predatory glint beneath her placid smile. Around them, the company's executive board, a collection of individuals ranging from seasoned veterans to ambitious newcomers, and a scattering of legal counsel fidgeted, their collective unease a low hum that Alastair Thorne, with his acute senses, could almost feel. Each person in that room sensed a monumental shift about to occur, a seismic event in the corporate landscape. At the far end of the table, an older gentleman sat, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that seemed to hum with a quiet, almost imperceptible power. This was Alastair Thorne, the legendary founder, whose name was synonymous with innovation, immense wealth, and an unwavering, often ruthless, vision. His presence now commanded an absolute, unnerving silence that fell over the room, silencing even the most anxious whispers. He had watched them all enter, observed their nervous tics, their forced smiles, their subtle glances at Max and Genevieve, the presumptive heirs. He had seen the eager anticipation in their eyes, the expectation of a new era of even greater profits, perhaps a loosening of the old man's stringent ethical guidelines. And he knew, with a certainty born of decades spent dissecting human nature, that they were about to be profoundly mistaken. The charade, Alastair Thorne's voice, though aged, resonated with an undeniable authority that filled every corner of the vast room, cutting through the thick air like a perfectly honed blade. Has finally concluded. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept over the faces of Max and Genevieve, who stiffened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of confusion, then a dawning bewilderment, crossed their features. They exchanged a quick, bewildered glance, a silent question passing between them, a shared moment of uncertainty. What charade? What was this old man, supposedly at the cusp of retirement, talking about? They had anticipated a grand announcement of their succession, perhaps even a public endorsement, a final, ceremonial passing of the torch. Not this enigmatic pronouncement, this veiled accusation. Max, ever the more brazen, the one who always met discomfort with a sneer, offered a condescending chuckle, a sound devoid of genuine amusement. "Uncle Alastair, are you quite all right? Perhaps the excitement of handing over the reins has overwhelmed you." He leaned back in his chair, feigning concern, his eyes betraying his impatience. Genevieve, with a saccharine smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes, added, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "Indeed, dear Alastair. Let's get to the point, shall we? The Foundation is eager to begin its new chapter under fresh leadership." Her hand hovered over a document on the table, a symbolic gesture of readiness to sign away his old ways. Alastair's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile, devoid of humor. The narrator knew, with a certainty that transcended mere observation, that this smile was not of amusement, but of a profound, bitter irony. He saw their impatience, their avarice, their utter lack of comprehension of the true nature of the moment. They were still trapped in their superficial world, their minds fixed on power and prestige, incapable of perceiving the intricate web of tests and observations that had led to this very precipice. The game, as Alastair had so aptly put it, was indeed over. And they, the self-proclaimed victors, were about to discover they had been playing on a board entirely of Alastair's design, where the rules, and the stakes, were far higher than they had ever imagined. The cold, hard truth, however, would soon descend upon them with the force of a collapsing skyscraper, leaving behind only the dust of their shattered expectations. The path to this moment of stark revelation had been a long and arduous one, paved with a lifetime of observation, disillusionment, and a growing weariness that settled deep within Alastair Thorne's soul. He had built Thorne Industries from a humble garage startup, a place where late nights were fueled by cheap coffee and grand dreams, into a global powerhouse, a titan of innovation and industry. He had personally overseen its growth, from its first patent to its sprawling international offices, pouring his very essence into its foundations. He had seen fortunes made and lost, empires rise and fall, and through it all, he had learned the harsh, often brutal, realities of human nature. Loyalty, he had discovered, was often a transient commodity, easily bought with promises of promotion and just as easily discarded when a better offer arrived. Compassion, a rare gem in the corporate jungle, was usually a performative act, a mask donned for public consumption, shed the moment the cameras were off. He had seen too many charitable donations announced with great fanfare, only to be followed by ruthless cost-cutting measures that impacted the most vulnerable employees. His own family, or rather, the ambitious individuals he had chosen to groom as potential successors, his grandnephew Maxwell, the son of his estranged sister, and his grandniece Genevieve, a distant cousin's daughter he had taken under his wing after her parents' untimely demise, had proven to be the most potent source of his disillusionment. He had watched them for years, provided them with every opportunity, every luxury imaginable, from elite boarding schools to prestigious university degrees, every chance to prove themselves worthy not just of the Thorne name, but of the immense responsibility that came with leading such an organization. He had given them significant roles, allowed them to make decisions, even absorbed the occasional failure as a learning experience. Yet, all he had witnessed was an escalating pattern of self-interest, an insatiable greed that knew no bounds, and a chilling lack of empathy that made his own blood run cold. Max was a charismatic shark, adept at manipulating markets and people with a deceptive charm, but utterly devoid of a moral compass. His business strategies were often brilliant in their ruthlessness, achieving impressive numbers at the cost of smaller competitors and sometimes the very employees who built the company. Genevieve was a socialite, meticulously crafting her public image as a tireless philanthropist and champion of various causes, while privately dismissing anyone who couldn't directly advance her agenda or elevate her social standing. Their charitable endeavors, Alastair knew, were nothing more than elaborate PR stunts, meticulously designed to burnish their reputations and distract from their true, predatory natures. He remembered a particular foundation ball where Genevieve had waxed lyrical about empowering impoverished women, only to later complain to Max about the smell of desperation from the very people they claimed to help. They saw the world as a chessboard, and everyone in it as pawns to be sacrificed for their personal gain, expendable tools in their ascent to ultimate power. The tipping point had come subtly, not as a single, dramatic event, but a series of small, almost imperceptible betrayals that chipped away at Alastair's remaining faith in them. It wasn't just corporate espionage or questionable ethical dealings, which he had, with a heavy heart, come to expect and even, grudgingly, tolerate as unfortunate aspects of the cutthroat business world. It was their casual cruelty, their dismissive attitude towards the less fortunate, their thinly veiled contempt for anyone who didn't possess their wealth or status. He had once overheard Max making a crude joke, filled with mocking laughter, about a struggling vendor's financial woes, a small family business facing bankruptcy, while Genevieve had publicly chastised a low-level mailroom employee for a minor spill in the executive hallway, reducing the young woman to tears with her icy disdain and thinly veiled threats about her job security. These were not isolated incidents but symptomatic of a deeper rot, a moral decay that Alastair found utterly repugnant, a stark contrast to the values he had strived to embed within Thorne Industries. He recalled a particularly galling instance where they had both refused to intervene when a long-term, loyal employee, suffering from a debilitating illness, was being unfairly denied his full pension benefits by a heartless HR department they nominally oversaw. Their excuse was company policy, but Alastair recognized it as pure indifference. He realized that simply bequeathing his empire to them, despite their familial ties and the expectations of the board, would be an act of profound injustice, a betrayal of everything he had strived to build. His legacy wasn't just about profits, it was about the principles he had tried to uphold, the quiet innovations that improved lives, the respect he had always tried to show even the humblest of his employees, the integrity with which he conducted his business. He couldn't entrust it to those who viewed humanity as a resource to be exploited, a means to an end. The thought of his life's work falling into such hands gnawed at him, disturbing his sleep and casting a long shadow over his days. He couldn't retire knowing that everything he cherished would be corrupted. And so, the audacious plan began to germinate in his brilliant, aging mind. He needed to see them, truly see them, when they believed no one of consequence was watching. He needed to strip away the veneer of power and observe how they treated someone utterly insignificant, someone they perceived as having absolutely nothing to offer them. He needed a test, not of business acumen, which they had in abundance, but of character, of the very soul. He needed to see if there was any flicker of genuine humanity beneath the polished facade. The concept of Arthur was meticulously crafted, a persona built from observation and a desperate hope. Arthur would be everything Alistair Thorne was not, an elderly, disheveled former dock worker, forgotten by time, lost and vulnerable. He would be a man of no consequence, no influence, no power, a mere statistic in the city's vast population. He would represent the very bottom of the societal ladder, a person most likely to be dismissed, ignored, or worse, scorned. Alistair consulted with a specialized team of professional makeup artists, stylists, and even method acting coaches, not to transform himself into an unrecognizable caricature, but into a truly believable embodiment of urban decay and quiet desperation. He studied the gaits of old men burdened by years of manual labor, the subtle tremor of their hands as they reached for something, the weary slump of their shoulders after a long day. He practiced speaking with a slightly hoarse, gravelly voice, tinged with a lifetime of working in the elements and years of disuse. His wardrobe, meticulously sourced from charity shops in the city's forgotten corners, was chosen for its authentic shabbiness, a threadbare, moth-eaten coat, trousers stained with phantom grease, shoes worn thin at the soles, their leather cracked and peeling. He would carry a battered old canvas satchel, its contents appearing meager and mundane, a few crumpled papers, a half-eaten biscuit. The goal was not merely to be unrecognizable, but to be invisible. To melt into the background, to become a nuisance, a shadow that the privileged would instinctively try to sweep away without a second thought. He wanted to feel the cold shoulder of indifference, to experience the sharp sting of dismissal, to truly understand how those with power viewed the powerless. This elaborate masquerade was not just a means to an end, it was a profound, personal journey into the heart of humanity, a desperate search for the elusive flicker of genuine compassion in a world he feared had become irrevocably cold, blinded by wealth and status. He believed, with a profound and almost desperate hope, that if true kindness existed, if selfless empathy still lived in the human heart, it would reveal itself when there was absolutely nothing to gain. He also knew the risk: if his disguise was broken, the entire plan would unravel, and his family would accuse him of senility, perhaps even attempt to seize control through legal means. But the stakes were too high to falter. The morning of the grand charity gala, ostensibly hosted by Max and Genevieve, arrived with a calculated flourish of limousines gliding through the city streets, a cacophony of flashing cameras, and the murmur of anticipation around the glittering Thorne corporate headquarters. The city buzzed with the impending event, social pages already anticipating the photographs. Inside, the lobby, usually a bastion of corporate efficiency and understated elegance, had been transformed into a lavish ballroom. Silk drapes cascaded from the impossibly high ceilings, shimmering with fairy lights that cast a soft, ethereal glow, and caterers, dressed in crisp white uniforms, bustled about with trays of champagne flutes and exotic canapés, their movements orchestrated with military precision. Max, looking resplendent in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his hair immaculately slicked back, worked the room with practiced ease, his smile fixed and charming, his handshakes firm and deliberate, each interaction a calculated move. Genevieve, in a gown that must have cost a small fortune, a shimmering emerald green silk that hugged her figure, floated among the guests, her laughter a melodic, if somewhat hollow, accompaniment to the classical music playing softly in the background. They were, in their own eyes, the very picture of success, generosity, and effortless charm, the deserving heirs to Alistair's vast empire, basking in the glow of public adoration. It was precisely at the height of this orchestrated spectacle that Arthur made his entrance. He shuffled through the automatic doors, a stark, jarring silhouette against the gleaming marble floors and the dazzling lights that illuminated the opulent space. His threadbare overcoat seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more diminished, his stooped posture suggesting a lifetime of burdens carried, of physical toil. His eyes, though disguised with subtle makeup to appear clouded and unfocused, held a keen, intelligent spark that only the most observant might have noticed, a spark that belonged to Alistair Thorne, the shrewd observer, now playing the role of the observed. He feigned confusion, his head tilting slightly as he took in the opulent scene, a bewildered frown creasing his heavily made-up brow, his entire being radiating a quiet disorientation. He shuffled closer to the main reception desk, a grand structure of polished onyx, where a nervous young interne, barely out of college, was attempting to manage the influx of high-profile guests, his brow furrowed with the immense pressure. "Excuse me, young man," Arthur's voice was a low, raspy whisper, just loud enough to be heard over the genteel chatter and the clinking of glasses. I think I'm lost. Is this the old Thorne Dockyards? I worked here, many years ago. Arthur, they called me. Just Arthur." He let his gaze wander around the room, as if searching for something familiar in the glittering unfamiliarity. The interne, flustered and clearly overwhelmed, pointed vaguely towards the security guards stationed near the entrance, his face a mask of polite panic. "Sir, this is the corporate headquarters. It's a private event tonight. Perhaps you should try down the street, for the Old Docks Museum?" He spoke quickly, eager to resolve the situation without drawing attention. Just then, Max and Genevieve, performing a sweep of the lobby to ensure their public appearance was flawless, their smiles wide and unwavering, drifted past, their eyes constantly scanning the room for important faces. Max, spotting the commotion and the uncomfortable interne, frowned, his perfect evening momentarily marred. "What's going on here? We don't want any unsavory elements disturbing our guests." His voice was low, but carried an edge of irritation. Arthur, seizing his moment, turned to them, his eyes wide with a carefully practiced vulnerability, a slight tremor in his hands. "Oh, forgive me, sir. Ma'am. I'm just trying to find my way. I was told I might find help here. I'm a bit confused, you see. My memory, it's not what it used to be. Arthur, they called me. Did you know Arthur? From the docks?" He deliberately fumbled with the strap of his old satchel, making himself appear even more disoriented, more pitiable. He watched their faces, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of compassion. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted smile faltered, replaced by a look of thinly veiled disgust that she barely managed to conceal. Her nose wrinkled slightly, as if detecting an unpleasant odor that offended her refined sensibilities. "Good heavens, Max. What is this vagrant doing in our lobby?" She gestured dismissively with a manicured hand adorned with diamonds. "Security. Get this man out of here immediately. He's clearly senile. We cannot have him unsettling our esteemed guests." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the pleasant background noise. Max, ever the pragmatist, seeing the immediate need to maintain appearances, nodded, already signaling to a nearby guard with a subtle flick of his wrist. Indeed. We have an image to uphold. And besides, he added, his voice dropping slightly but still audible to Alistair's keen ears, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, a testament to his ingrained callousness, it seems some people just don't understand when their golden years are truly over. Some old relics just need to be put out to pasture, wouldn't you agree? His gaze, devoid of any warmth, lingered on Arthur's stooped frame, a clear message of contempt, of dismissal. Alistair felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The words, uttered so casually, were a profound confirmation of his deepest fears. The security guard, a burly man named Frank, who had been with Thorn Industries for over a decade, approached Alistair with a practiced blend of firmness and slight weariness. He had seen similar situations before, though rarely so brazenly ignored by the company's elite. "All right, sir, let's go. You can't be here." He took Arthur gently but firmly by the arm, his grip just enough to guide him, not to hurt him, towards the revolving doors. Alistair, playing his part, offered a mournful, confused gaze at Max and Genevieve, who had already turned their backs, their faces resuming their bright, vacuous smiles as they re-engaged with their wealthy guests. The brief encounter was already forgotten, a minor inconvenience swiftly dealt with, a stain on their perfect evening erased. Outside, the cool evening air bit at Arthur's exposed skin, a stark contrast to the stifling warmth inside. Frank, the security guard, paused at the curb, glancing around to ensure no one was watching too closely. "Look, old-timer, I get it. It's tough out there. But you can't be loitering around here. You'll have to move along." He spoke with a gruff kindness, his voice rough but tinged with a genuine, if resigned, empathy, a stark contrast to the icy disdain Alistair had just endured. He even offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of sympathy. Alistair nodded, feigning a deep sigh, and shuffled away, his shoulders slumped not just in character, but with a profound, genuine sense of disappointment that settled like a lead weight in his chest. The words of Max and Genevieve echoed in his mind, golden years. The irony was a bitter taste on his tongue. They had no idea how truly over their own golden years were about to become. He found a relatively secluded bench across the street, in the shadow of a towering, impersonal office building, its windows reflecting the city lights like unblinking eyes, and sat down, his gaze fixed on the brightly lit Thorn headquarters, a fortress of superficiality and false warmth. He felt a deep weariness, a confirmation of his deepest fears about the future of his legacy. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The stream of luxury cars continued to pull up, disgorging elegantly dressed men and women into the dazzling entrance, each one greeted by the effusive smiles of Max and Genevieve. Alistair watched, an invisible observer, a phantom in the bustling urban landscape, his heart heavy. He was disheartened, not by the coldness he had experienced, he had, after all, anticipated it, prepared for it, but by the sheer, unthinking nature of it. It was not active malice, but an utter, profound indifference, a complete lack of regard for another human being, which he found far more chilling than active hatred. It was the casual discard, the thoughtless cruelty that truly wounded him. Just as the last sliver of twilight faded, and the city lights truly began to blaze, casting long, distorted shadows, a figure emerged from a side entrance of the Thorn building, unnoticed by the security or the valet, a door used by staff who finished late. It was an elderly woman, her movements slow but deliberate, carrying a worn fabric lunch bag clutched in one hand. This was Alara Finch, 68 years old, a mailroom clerk at Thorn Industries for over 4 decades, her tenure far exceeding that of most executives. Her clothes were simple, practical, and meticulously clean, though clearly old and well-worn. Her face, etched with the gentle lines of age and quiet resilience, held a warmth that seemed to defy the chill of the evening air. She was, to the grand machinery of Thorn Industries, a mere cog, a name on a payroll, easily overlooked, never celebrated, her contributions quietly absorbed into the daily hum of the corporation. Yet, within her beat a heart that recognized the subtle nuances of human suffering, a heart that had learned empathy from a lifetime of its own quiet struggles and observations. Alara paused, her gaze sweeping the street with the practiced eye of someone who notices the small details others miss, the slight shifts in posture, the forgotten expressions. Her eyes landed on the slumped figure of Arthur on the bench. She saw the way his shoulders drooped, the subtle tremor in his hands as he adjusted his satchel, the air of profound weariness that clung to him like a second skin. She saw not a vagrant, not a nuisance, but a fellow human being, tired and perhaps lost, struggling in the biting cold. The narrator knew Alara's thoughts, her simple, unvarnished empathy. She had little herself, a modest apartment she had lived in for decades, a pension that barely covered her expenses, the quiet solitude of a life lived largely unnoticed by the world outside her small circle. But what she did have, she shared freely, without expectation of return. Her own lunch, a simple sandwich and a thermos of tea, was her small comfort after a long day, yet she felt an immediate, undeniable pull to share it, a quiet voice within her urging her forward. She remembered stories from her own childhood, of her grandmother always offering a cup of tea to a passing stranger, a simple act of human connection. She walked slowly but purposefully across the street, her steps deliberate, her gaze unwavering. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft, gentle, almost apologetic, as if not wishing to disturb him. "Are you all right? You look a bit lost." Arthur, startled by the unexpected voice, looked up. He saw no pity in her eyes, no judgment, but a genuine concern, a quiet kindness that felt like a sudden ray of sun on a cold day, piercing through the gloom. He felt a flicker of surprise, a genuine warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with his disguise. This was unexpected. "Just resting, ma'am," he rasped, playing his part, making his voice sound even more worn. "Long day. Long life, I suppose." He let his gaze drop, as if too weary to meet her eyes fully. Alara sat down carefully on the bench, leaving a comfortable space between them, respecting his personal bubble. She opened her lunch bag, the rustle of the paper a soft sound in the quiet evening. "Well, you look like you could use a warm cup of tea," she said, pulling out a small, well-used thermos and a plastic cup, its edges worn smooth. "And I've got an extra sandwich here. Ham and cheese. I always pack too much." She offered them with a hesitant smile, not demanding, not pitying, simply offering, her hand extended in a gesture of pure generosity. She didn't press, merely waited for him to accept. Alistair, as Arthur, accepted the cup and the sandwich. His hands, disguised as gnarled and trembling, genuinely trembled as he took them, overwhelmed by the simple gesture. The tea was warm, comforting, a simple blessing that seeped into his chilled bones. He took a bite of the sandwich, the taste of plain ham and cheese suddenly the most delicious thing he had eaten in years, far surpassing the bland extravagance of countless gourmet meals and lavish banquets. None had tasted like this, imbued with such pure, selfless intent. "Thank you, ma'am," he managed, his voice thick with a genuine emotion that was seeping through his carefully constructed facade, threatening to break it. "You're very kind." "It's just tea and a sandwich," Alara demurred, her gaze gentle, dismissing his thanks as unnecessary. "No need for thanks. What brings you out here on such a cold night? Are you waiting for someone?" Her curiosity was genuine, not intrusive. Arthur began his fabricated story, weaving a tale of lost employment due to a factory closure, a small room he couldn't afford anymore, and a confusing journey that had led him, by some twist of fate, to this imposing building. He spoke of the old docks, the camaraderie that was gone, the feeling of being forgotten by a world that had moved on without him. He watched Alara's face as he spoke, searching for impatience, for skepticism, for any sign of the dismissal he had come to expect from those with power. But there was none. She listened, truly listened, her quiet attention a balm to his weary soul. She nodded occasionally, her eyes full of understanding, a deep empathy etched on her face. She asked small, gentle questions, prompting him to elaborate, never rushing him. "It sounds like you've had a very hard life, Arthur," she said softly, when he had finished, her voice filled with a quiet compassion. "The city can be a lonely place, especially when you're on your own. But there's always hope, you know. Even when things seem darkest. Sometimes, a kind word, a small gesture, it can make all the difference." Her words were simple, yet they resonated with a profound truth that Alistair, for all his wealth and power, had almost forgotten in his pursuit of success. She spoke of her own quiet difficulties, her simple life, the daily grind of her job, but always with a gentle optimism, a resilient spirit that shone through. She shared a small anecdote about a time she herself had been helped by a stranger when her car broke down years ago, emphasizing the interconnectedness of humanity, the ripple effect of kindness. She spoke of how a simple smile from a colleague could brighten her entire day. As Alistair sat there, disguised as Arthur, sipping the warm tea and feeling the simple nourishment of the sandwich, he watched the glittering spectacle across the street. He saw Max and Genevieve occasionally glance out, their faces illuminated by the flashing cameras, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding just yards away, oblivious to the true test that was taking place right under their noses. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. The cold, glittering indifference of the powerful inside, focused only on their image and their perceived success, and the quiet, unassuming kindness of a woman with little to give, yet who gave so freely, so genuinely, so completely. It was in that moment, under the harsh glow of the streetlights, feeling the genuine warmth of the teacup in his hand, that Alistair Thorne's decision solidified, hardening like steel. The empire, his legacy, built on decades of hard work and a foundational belief in human decency, would not fall into hands that valued profit over people, or status over compassion. It would be placed where it truly belonged, where it could truly do good. The air in the Thorne Industries boardroom was now thick with an almost palpable tension, a stark contrast to the initial self-congratulatory atmosphere. Alistair Thorne, having delivered his initial, enigmatic statement, paused, allowing his words to settle, to fester in the minds of Max and Genevieve. They still sat, rigid with confusion, their earlier condescension slowly giving way to a dawning sense of profound unease. They tried to interrupt, to demand an explanation, their voices strained and bordering on desperate, but Alistair's raised hand, though not forceful, was an absolute barrier, a silent, unyielding command that brooked no argument. The other board members shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between the three, sensing the seismic shift that was undeniably underway. "You both seem perplexed," Alistair's voice was calm, yet it carried an edge that sent a shiver down the spines of even the most hardened executives present. "Allow me to clarify. For the past several weeks, I have been conducting a personal review of my legacy, and more importantly, of those I had once considered worthy to carry it forward." His gaze fixed on Max, then on Genevieve, and for the first time a flicker of genuine fear, raw and unmasked, crossed their faces. They saw the cold fire in his eyes, the absolute resolve that had built his empire from nothing, now turned squarely on them, threatening to consume them. The room grew silent, the air crackling with unspoken tension. "You see," Alistair continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more chilling in its quiet certainty, "I have amassed a considerable fortune, built on principles of hard work, integrity, and a deep, if sometimes challenged, belief in human decency. As I approached the twilight of my own life, I realized I couldn't simply hand over what I'd built to individuals who might squander it, or worse, use it to perpetuate the very venality I sought to avoid, to exploit the very people I sought to uplift." Max finally found his voice, a strained, desperate laugh escaping him, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Uncle Alistair, what are you implying? This is absurd." We've dedicated our lives to Thorn Industries. We've increased profits, expanded our reach. Our charity work is exemplary. He gestured wildly around the room, as if appealing to the silent executives, begging for their support, for their validation. Some looked away, others simply stared, their faces unreadable. Charity work? Alistair's voice was now laced with a chilling sarcasm that cut through Max's bluster. Is that what you call it, Maxwell? A carefully orchestrated PR campaign designed to burnish your public image while privately you dismiss those less fortunate as vagrants and old relics? Genevieve gasped, her face draining of color, her usually perfect complexion turning ashen. Alistair, what are you talking about? We've always been nothing but respectful. You're mistaken. Her voice rose hysterically, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. Alistair leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous growl that commanded absolute attention, silencing her instantly. Oh, really? Do you recall a certain elderly gentleman, disoriented and lost, who approached you in the lobby during your so-called charity gala a few weeks ago? An old dock worker, he claimed, asking for help, feigning confusion about his golden years? His words were slow, deliberate, each one a nail in their coffin. Max and Genevieve's eyes widened in horror, a profound, sickening realization dawning upon them. Their minds raced back, a fleeting, insignificant memory resurfacing, the disheveled old man, the quick dismissal, the cruel jest about his golden years being over, the barely registered irritation. They had thought nothing of it, a mere blip in their self-important evening, immediately forgotten. Max swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry, the color draining from his face. That old fool? He was a nuisance, Alistair. Disrupting our event. He stammered, desperately trying to regain control, to deflect. A nuisance, you say? Alistair's voice was quiet, but it boomed in the suddenly silent room, echoing their own contempt back at them. Perhaps. But that nuisance was me, Maxwell. I was Arthur. The words hung in the air, a hammer blow to their carefully constructed reality, shattering it into irreparable pieces. Max's jaw dropped, his face contorting in disbelief, then a dawning, sickening realization, a mixture of horror and betrayal. Genevieve let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure terror, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Alistair's impassive face and Max's horrified expression, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The executives around the table stirred, whispers breaking the silence like dry leaves skittering across a barren landscape. They looked at Alistair, then at Max and Genevieve, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place, revealing a picture of staggering deception and shocking betrayal, not from Alistair, but from the very people they had thought were his chosen ones. Their faces were a mixture of shock, schadenfreude, and a newfound respect for the old man's cunning. Alistair, now standing tall, strode to the head of the table, pulling out a sleek tablet. On its screen, he projected a series of images, each one a damning indictment. First, candid shots of Max and Genevieve in their gala finery, their expressions of thinly veiled disgust as they dismissed Arthur, then, grainy but undeniably clear footage of Arthur sitting disheartened on the bench outside, his shoulders slumped in despair, and finally, footage, captured by a discreet camera Alistair had arranged, of Alara Finch, her face alight with genuine kindness, her hand extended, offering him tea and a sandwich. The final image, projected large for all to see, was a close-up of Alara's worn, kind face as she listened patiently to Arthur's fabricated story, her eyes brimming with empathy, a silent testament to a goodness that dwarfed the glittering gala. You, Maxwell, and you, Genevieve, Alistair said, his voice now devoid of sarcasm, filled only with a chilling finality, a deep, abiding disappointment, saw an old man in need and dismissed him with scorn and cruel jokes. You ordered him removed, seeing only a blight on your meticulously curated image, a momentary inconvenience. You judged him, not by his character, but by his perceived status, his lack of influence, his apparent poverty. He paused, allowing the crushing weight of his words to sink in, to permeate the stunned silence. You declared his golden years over. And in that moment, you sealed your own fate, not because of a test you failed, but because of the callousness you revealed. He gestured towards the screen, where Alara's kind face still shone, a beacon of human decency. Yet, a few moments later, another person emerged. Someone you have both overlooked for decades, someone you probably couldn't pick out of a lineup, a quiet cog in the machinery of this company. Alara Finch, our mailroom clerk. She saw not a nuisance, but a human being in distress. She offered kindness, warmth, and a simple meal, not because she had much to give, but because she had a heart that understood empathy, a spirit that valued human connection above all else. She listened to his story, offered comfort, and asked for nothing in return, no reward, no recognition. Alistair looked directly at Max and Genevieve, his eyes piercing through their shattered facade, stripping away their arrogance and leaving them bare. The true measure of a person is not how they treat their equals, or those who can benefit them, but how they treat those from whom they can gain absolutely nothing. You both failed that test spectacularly, not just as potential leaders, but as human beings. He turned to his lead legal team, their faces grim but resolute. Gentlemen, please proceed with the necessary announcements. His lead attorney, a stoic man named Richard Thorne, no relation to the family, stepped forward, his face grave. Ladies and gentlemen, by the explicit and unchangeable directives of Mr. Alistair Thorne, all previous succession plans naming Maxwell Thorne and Genevieve Dubois as his heirs, or as recipients of any significant portion of his personal wealth or control over Thorne Industries, are hereby revoked, effective immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the room, a wave of shock and disbelief. Max stumbled backward, knocking over his expensive chair, its crash echoing loudly in the sudden silence. No. You can't do this. This is insane. I'll sue. I'll destroy your reputation, old man. His voice was a desperate, primal scream, his face contorted in a mask of rage and fear. Genevieve, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and terror, her composure completely gone, shrieked, "You old fool! You can't give everything away because of some pathetic old man you pretended to be. We're your family. Your blood." She pointed a trembling finger at him, her words slurring in her fury. Alistair merely raised an eyebrow, his gaze calm and unwavering, his voice quiet but firm. Family, Genevieve? Family nurtures, it supports, it shows compassion. What you have shown is a profound emptiness, a moral vacuum. And as for destroying my reputation, Maxwell, I assure you, the truth, once revealed, will speak far louder than any falsehoods you might attempt to spread. He looked at them with an expression of profound disappointment, a deep sadness for what they could have been, and what they had chosen to become. Your golden years, indeed, are over. And not in the way you had hoped or intended. The meeting was adjourned, the executives quickly dispersing, leaving Max and Genevieve alone in the wreckage of their ambition. The fallout from Alistair Thorne's stunning revelation was immediate and catastrophic for Max and Genevieve. The news spread like wildfire through the corporate world, then exploded across global media, amplified by the shocking revelation of Alistair's disguise. Billionaire's undercover test exposes greedy heirs. Throne room humiliation for Thorne nephews, screamed headlines across newspapers and digital news sites. Their meticulously crafted public images, built on a foundation of lies and performance, shattered into a million pieces. The charity galas, the philanthropic awards, the carefully curated social media posts showcasing their fabricated generosity, all were exposed as hollow performance, a cynical manipulation. Public outrage was swift and merciless, a torrent of condemnation. Sponsors pulled out of their ventures, prominent board members resigned in disgrace, fearing association, and their carefully built social circles evaporated overnight, leaving them utterly isolated. Max and Genevieve found themselves pariahs, their names synonymous with cold-hearted avarice and shallow ambition. Their lavish homes, sprawling estates filled with expensive art and designer furniture, their luxury cars, their vast art collections, all were systematically stripped away, subjected to complex legal battles and public auctions to settle mounting debts and legal fees. Their personal accounts, once overflowing with countless millions, were now subject to complex legal battles and freezes, leaving them with little more than the clothes on their backs and the bitter taste of utter ruin. The companies they had overseen under Alastair's tutelage, once shining examples of corporate success, now lacked the founder's trust, and their unethical dealings, once overlooked or quietly managed, were now under harsh scrutiny by regulatory bodies and investigative journalists. They were forced to sell assets at fire sale prices, their reputations so toxic that even their closest associates and former cronies abandoned them, unwilling to be dragged down by their public disgrace. Max, once a towering figure of finance, renowned for his aggressive deals, found himself unable to secure even a mid-level consultancy position, his name a byword for corporate disgrace and moral bankruptcy. Genevieve, the darling of the social scene, her face gracing countless magazine covers, was now shunned, her once vibrant presence relegated to the whispers of scandal sheets and tabloid gossip. Their golden years, which they had so cruelly mocked Arthur for lamenting, were indeed over, replaced by a bleak, unrecognizable future of struggle, public humiliation, and the gnawing regret of what could have been. They lived in a small, rented apartment, a stark contrast to their former palaces, perpetually bitter, still blaming Alastair for their downfall, never truly comprehending their own complicity. Meanwhile, Alara Finch, the unassuming mailroom clerk, was summoned to Alastair Thorne's private office a few days after the dramatic reveal. She arrived, her heart pounding with trepidation, her mind racing, convinced she was about to be reprimanded for something she couldn't recall, perhaps a misplaced package or a late delivery. She had heard the whispers about Max and Genevieve, the shocking news that Alastair Thorne himself had been the old man in the lobby, the mysterious Arthur, but she couldn't fathom why she, a humble mailroom clerk, was being called into the CEO's private sanctum. Alastair, no longer in disguise, sat behind his immense desk, its surface gleaming, a gentle smile on his face, his eyes warm and kind. "Alara," he began, his voice soft, gentle, devoid of any of the gruffness he sometimes adopted in his business dealings, "do you remember an old man, a few weeks ago, outside the building? He called himself Arthur?" Alara's eyes widened in realization, a wave of understanding washing over her. "Yes, sir," she whispered, remembering the biting cold, the steaming tea, the simple ham and cheese sandwich. "He seemed so lost. I thought he might be hungry, or cold." Her voice was barely audible, her humility unwavering. Alastair nodded, his eyes filled with a warmth and gratitude that Max and Genevieve had never seen, and never would. "He was. And you, Alara, you showed him a kindness that transcended simple charity, a profound empathy. You showed him genuine compassion, when others, those who had everything, those who claimed to care for the public good, showed only disdain, coldness, and contempt." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, his gaze fixed on her. Then he gestured to his lead attorney, Richard Thorne, who stepped forward with a thick, official-looking folder, its contents poised to change her life forever. "Alara, I have made some significant changes to my will and the future of Thorne Industries. While the corporation will now be overseen by a newly formed trust, dedicated to ethical practices and sustainable growth, upholding the values I originally founded this company on, I have also made provisions for those who truly deserve to be acknowledged, for those whose actions demonstrate the true spirit of humanity." Alara's heart pounded even harder, a frantic drum in her chest. She had no idea what was coming, her mind reeling from the implications of his words. Alara Finch, the attorney read from the crisp document, his voice formal, clear, and resonant, for your unwavering integrity, your decades of dedicated service to Thorn Industries, and most importantly, for your profound and selfless act of kindness, Mr. Thorn has seen fit to bestow upon you a fully paid, debt-free home in a quiet neighborhood of your choosing, a substantial financial endowment that will ensure your absolute comfort and security for the remainder of your life, and a directorship position on the newly formed Thorn Philanthropic Foundation, where your innate empathy and genuine compassion will guide its true mission, ensuring its resources truly benefit those in need. Alara stood there, stunned, tears welling in her eyes, blurring the elegant office. She shook her head slowly, unable to process the magnitude of the words, the sheer, unimaginable generosity. But sir, I just offered him some tea and a sandwich. I didn't do anything special, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, her humility as profound as Alistair's generosity. She truly believed it was just a small act, a simple human gesture. Alistair rose and walked around his desk, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. That, Alara, was everything. In a world often blinded by greed, by status, by power, your simple act shone brighter than any diamond, more powerfully than any grand gesture. You saw humanity where others saw only inconvenience. You proved that true wealth lies not in what one possesses, but in the compassion one extends to others, in the quiet, unassuming acts of genuine kindness. Alara, overwhelmed, sank into the plush chair Alistair offered her, quiet sobs racking her frail frame. It was not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated shock and gratitude, a profound release of a lifetime of quiet struggle. A lifetime of being overlooked, of quiet dedication, of unnoticed struggles, was suddenly, miraculously, transformed. She had given a simple act of kindness, expecting nothing, and received a future beyond her wildest dreams, a future where her inherent goodness could truly flourish. Months later, Alistair Thorn found a quiet contentment he had rarely experienced in his long, powerful life. He had retired fully, stepping back from the daily operations of Thorn Industries, now managed by a team of trusted, ethically minded professionals, individuals he had secretly vetted over the years, who shared his values. The Thorn Philanthropic Foundation, under Alara Finch's gentle but firm guidance, was already making a tangible difference in communities, focusing on sustainable aid, genuine support for the overlooked, and initiatives that truly empowered individuals, not just for show. Alara, now living in a cozy, charming bungalow with a small garden she meticulously tended, often visited local soup kitchens, still bringing her own thermos of tea and sandwiches, though now she had the means to provide much more substantial assistance, quietly and without fanfare. Her compassion remained unchanged, simply amplified by her new circumstances, her innate kindness finally unleashed on a larger scale. She had found a quiet joy in her newfound ability to help, her eyes still holding that same warmth, that same understanding gaze. Alistair would often receive her handwritten notes, simple thank yous or updates on the Foundation's work, notes that meant more to him than any corporate report, a testament to the quiet, profound impact of his decision. He had found his own golden years in seeing his legacy truly benefit humanity, in knowing that his wealth was now in hands that understood its true purpose. Max and Genevieve, by contrast, had vanished from public life, their names now whispered only as cautionary tales of ambition gone awry. They lived in drastically reduced circumstances, clinging to the remnants of their former lives, perpetually bitter, forever blaming Alistair for their downfall, refusing to accept any responsibility for their own actions. They never understood the true nature of their failure, forever trapped in their superficiality, believing themselves victims of an old man's caprice rather than the architects of their own ruin. Their once resplendent lives had indeed become the pasture Max had so cruelly joked about for Arthur, a barren landscape of faded glory and endless regret. The story of Alistair Thorn and Alara Finch serves as a timeless reminder that character is not forged in the crucible of success, but revealed in the quiet darkness of adversity, when the masks fall away. It is in those moments, when no one of consequence is watching, when there is nothing to gain, that the true essence of a human heart shines through. Compassion, a seemingly small and insignificant act, holds a power that can reshape destinies, dismantle empires built on greed, and build new foundations rooted in kindness. For in the grand tapestry of life, it is often the quiet, unassuming threads of genuine empathy that weave the most beautiful and enduring patterns, proving that goodness, no matter how small, always finds its profound and extraordinary reward. If you were moved by Alistair's journey and Alara's unwavering kindness, you'll find more stories of unexpected heroes and profound lessons right here on our channel. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next deep dive into human nature. And we want to hear from you. What do you think was Alistair's biggest disappointment with Max and Genevieve? And what small act of kindness have you witnessed that truly made a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below.